All right, good evening. Hopefully we'll have a handful of other folks kind of streaming in on the live stream, but want to welcome everyone here. I'm going to try to ignore this, even though I spend most of the day looking at this for a meeting. Here I am actually with people. So try and ignore that. Hopefully we'll have a handful of other folks kind of streaming in on mute this real quick. There we go. Thought I had that muted. Now I have. Anyway, I'm Brent Lackey. I'm the president of Whittier Heights Community Council. Really appreciate Councilmember Dan Strauss joining us this evening. We tried to do this about 7 or 8 weeks ago, and the date wasn't good, didn't work out. So some folks showed up here, and we apologized and said we'd make sure to try and make it happen as a rain check. And so here we are. In the time since we were going to meet, you've been through a grueling budget process, but now we can hear about kind of what the upshots of that are. For folks at home, there's about half a dozen of us here at United Free Evangelical Church. I appreciate your coming online with us. Dan's just going to basically talk about what's been going on with the budget and what's been going on in his office, and share with us a little bit of the plans and goals for next year, and then we're just going to have a question and answer session, and I will try to attend to sort of Q&A coming in from folks out there. You should have a raise the hand kind of button if you're attending online, and I could try and look at that to call on you and give you a chance to ask a question as well. But we'll give priority to folks who made their way up the street to here anyway. So. I don't have a lot more by way of introduction. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you and give you the platform.
Well, thanks. So I'll take off mine now.
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Great to see everyone out in Zoom lands, and great to see everyone here in person.
Unmute you.
Oh, do you want me to unmute?
Oh, that whole digital.
So it's easy. I'll just apologize. Looks like the laptop that Dan's using, which I will say is my laptop, is not running properly, but he's right here. So we could just go like that and make it keep working.
Yeah. So I'll try. Apologies to anyone watching online. I'm going to be looking at the people here in person. And so, yes, we just finished the 3-month budget process at the end of November. And right now we are in the middle of getting that final work done before the holidays. And this is the end of the biennium. So council works in 2-year segments. This is the end of that 2-year segment. So right now we are readjusting council rules. That's something I'll talk about more later. We are getting ready to elect a new council president. We have a new, and we'll see tonight, 2 new council members coming on in January. So there's a lot of work going on today. For instance, also like the zoo agreement. It might not seem like a big deal, but it has occupied a lot of our time re-establishing the agreement between the Parks Department and the zoo, which is a 20-year contract. So big things going on. You know, for me this year with the budget cycle, I focused on 3 buckets of work. Good governance was kind of a 4th, but that's just kind of my job. So the 3 buckets were addressing homelessness at the level of crisis that we're experiencing, investing in public spaces, and ensuring community and public safety. And so there's been a number of different things that we were able to do. Regarding community and public safety, there was a lot of noise in the community in the news. What I can tell you here is that we fully funded SPD's staffing plan, hiring plan, and the position authority that they have. I know that that's can be a controversial topic, but we fully funded all of those requirements. There are other aspects of the police budget that did get changed. And what's more important is that we scaled up the alternatives to police response. So this last summer, there was a third-party certified consultant report calling out the fact that up to 49% of SPD's 911 calls could and or should be responded to by somebody who is not a police officer. But to do that, we need to have those programs in place. And we already have those programs in place. We just need them scaled to the level of service that we need. And so some of those are the community service officers were fully funded and expanded. The Health One program, which is the Seattle Fire Department low acuity response, was scaled up with plans to expand to 4th and 5th team. And we started a new program called Triage One that would go through the fire department, like Health One, but to assess where the person needs to go. My biggest priority for this budget cycle has been the mobile crisis team. The mobile crisis team is the team that responds to people with mental health or behavioral health issues. And so when I got elected, the city was investing $0 in the mobile crisis team. And as of today, we're investing $3.5 million. So we've always had citywide response, but the need has been greater than the teams that we have. And so I think of it like metro buses. The mobile crisis team is a county program, but Seattle needs its own service. So much like with Seattle Transportation Benefit District, county buses, county program, Seattle needs its own service, so we pay for it. So those are the real 4 big things that we did. Mobile crisis team got scaled up, Health One, community service officers, and Triage One. Something else that's come out, especially for District 6, where we've got so much waterway, is even in 2019, we only had 3 harbor patrol boats patrolling all our 201 miles of coastline. And so I've put forward money to get a third-party study to determine what level of service we need on our waterways. Do we need around our parks? Do we need parks employees on boats or lifeguards on boats? Do we need more than 3 vessels patrolling all of our waterways? Because we don't know how to staff until we have somebody, until we know what level we need to staff to. So that's community safety. With vibrant public spaces, I've funded the next round of redesigning Ballard Avenue's Cafe Street, so that this can be a model for other neighborhoods in the city to use. We were successful at bringing in some money for the Weary Triangle. Find my notes. We did quite a bit with vibrant public spaces, because if you look at our road, parks remediation, we added another $1 million, so now about $3 million to rehabilitate parks across the city, so that people can enjoy the outdoors. And I'm just getting so involved with it. So we've had and homelessness, and so there was a large amount of investment in new shelters so that we can stand up new shelter. We are transitioning to the Regional Homelessness Authority, which luckily will take politicians out of the decision-making process. Yeah, good, thank you. So the Regional Homelessness Authority is the county and the city. Yeah, fair enough.
Keep going. Switch. Keep making.
So in the past, the county and the city have both had homelessness responses that were duplicative in administration and processes, but would not talk to each other. And so now, much like Seattle King County Public Health, we have one group that is addressing homelessness countywide, regionally. We're going to start in downtown Seattle because that is the county seat. And whether you get dropped off at Harborview or the county jail, oftentimes your only way home is they'll give you a bus ticket. And so that is why they're starting downtown. Made a lot of pitches, and even in my last town hall, you can see I had a great interaction with the new CEO and about the need for them to come here next. And so pledging to bring more money there. I did propose additional District 6 outreach workers, because District 6 does have dedicated outreach workers. And we're going to be looking at reestablishing the two existing contracts for next year. Unfortunately, my expansion did not get included in the final budget. But what did get included in the final budget was the vehicle residency outreach program. So the city does not, there's no city employees that do outreach to people living in RVs or in cars. And so we rely on a nonprofit vehicle outreach team to do this work. And I'll tell you, I have relied heavily upon them. And so their funding was not included in the mayor's budget. So we got their baseline funding back. And then we even expanded that funding even more so. To expand their funding, I did have to cut from one of my other priorities, which is the Finney Neighborhood Association's Hot Meal Program. The Hot Meal Program is based out of the Greenwood Senior Center and does both delivery and in-person meals. And their in-person meals are also tied with a number of social services. So luckily, the base budget that we got had quite a lot of funding for homelessness. We were able to add specific projects for District 6, such as vehicle outreach team. Something else that's quite important to understand is that one of the reasons that we are in this homelessness crisis is because of our housing shortage. There are other aspects that contribute to homelessness, but at the end of the day, if there's not affordable housing in our region and in our city, people fall into homelessness. And so in 2017, the McKinsey report stated we needed to be investing $200 million per year in housing. And this is the first year we've done that. And so while it's not directly addressing the symptoms of homelessness, it is addressing the root of homelessness. And so those are my three big buckets. My team put together a series of newsletters helping people along the way through the budget process. So if you go to my website, it's all contained there. There's an article about all of my amendments. There's articles about public safety, homelessness, and vibrant public spaces. And then we're going to be sending out tomorrow or Friday the kind of wrap up of what was the final take from the budget. So if you haven't already signed up for my newsletter, you can do that on my website as well. Great question. So it builds everything from, so when we look at housing, 0 to 30% AMI are people who are very poor, that don't have money. Usually these folks are on Social Security or disability, they don't have a job. And so for folks in that category, we need to have permanent supportive housing so that, and we subsidize their housing. So part of their rent is paid through disabilities or Social Security, and part of it's subsidized through city funding. Well, so the $200 million funds more permanent supportive housing. It funds more 30 to 60% AMI, so that's just low income housing, folks that are fine, they just don't have enough money in their paycheck to pay more rent. And so we're also funding 30 to 60% AMI. From 60 to 80% AMI, that we're also funding some of that, but that's also where MFTE, multifamily tax exemption, comes in. And so there's a range, but really our affordable housing is focused on 0 to 60% AMI, so that the folks that have the least amount of money in their paycheck have a place to live. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wonder if there's a housing shortage, housing shortage can mean all kinds of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll put it to you this way. I used to live across the street from the locks, and when I was growing up, that apartment building had very low income residents. I can tell you, very low income residents. When a friend moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in 2009, the rent was $950. It went up to $1150 by 2011. When I moved into the building in 2017, a 1-bedroom was $1,750. The only thing that was different since when I was growing up was they took out the shag carpeting and they put in new appliances. And so when we talk about affordable housing in that way, when there's a decrease in the stock, decrease in the supply of housing, the existing housing, no matter what state it's in, becomes more expensive and pushes people out.
Okay, so the funding doesn't go to create more housing, more physical structure.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So we're going to build more housing. We're going to buy existing houses. So buying apartment buildings, buying hotels. It's faster to buy a building than it is to build a building. So we're going to be doing both.
And is that happening through Seattle Housing Authority or?
Seattle Housing, great question. Seattle Housing Authority is actually a nonprofit that is not a city entity. And so they manage housing. The Office of Housing is the city department that distributes the funding. So they will give money to nonprofits that are building the housing. Yeah.
So on the lowest level, that 0 to 60 are folks who can't afford to live anywhere.
0
to
to
get
30.
help,
Yep.
right? Folks who are homeless, ostensibly. There were something like 12,000 or so of them in the most recent count. Where are we now in terms of available stock to sort of a number? What are you hearing from staff, from King County Regional Homeless Authority?
A stock of housing or stock of shelter?
Well, I guess shelter. I guess first places for people to go is really what I want to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that is a nice wrap up of my budget section of this conversation. If you want to learn more about my budget, feel free to check out all of the different newsletters that we've written up.
I have a bunch of questions about some of the other stuff you talked about, but I was just sort of keying on her and continuing. But if you want to keep presenting before we get into Q&A, that's fine too. I didn't mean to hijack if you had further thoughts you want to share.
Yeah, no, I mean, so shelter, on any given night, there are usually only about 4 shelter beds that are open out of the 2,500 shelter beds that we have. In the last 2 months, we have brought on new shelter that the city council funded a year ago. So this shelter was funded a year ago. I had hoped that it would be open by March so that we could do the work that we've just done at the Valley Commons. And I can talk about that later. But the reason that we are not able to make a more meaningful intervention in visible homelessness is because we don't have the shelter stock to meet it. The reason that we don't have the shelter stock to meet it is because there has not been a good throughput out of shelter into permanent supportive housing or low income housing, in part because we as a city have been going at it on our own. With the Regional Authority on Homelessness, we now have the entire county to look at as far as being able to rehouse people.
The homeless people typically don't want to go to shelters. I have friends who work in those shelters and they say it's I mean, there's so many complications along the way.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a good question because during the pandemic, we have changed the way that we address homelessness. And it's been very important because the old way of doing it is get a congregate shelter, get a gymnasium with a bunch of bunk beds, and just have people in it. It's not a safe place for anyone in there. If there's one predator in that room, nobody gets a wink of sleep because everyone's worried that they're going to be predated upon, right? What is good shelter is having a small room with only a couple people in it at most, with services where you can come and go all day. You can live because also congregate shelter oftentimes denied your access at certain periods of the day. And so people oftentimes refuse congregate shelter because it does not meet their needs. It's not a 24/7 access. You can't keep your pets' possessions and you can't have a partner there. With non-congregate shelter, so these are tiny home villages, hotel, motel rooms, and enhanced shelter, you have 24/7 access. You can have your pets and partners and you can keep your things there. So
I'm going to interrupt just to say that some folks in chat are saying they can't hear when questions are coming from out in the audience. So you and I can try and cover that by just repeating them.
Sounds good.
She just asked you.
That's the model that you're working on. that's what the funding is gonna go for, so what you just start.
So all new shelter that is, so the question is money funding congregate or non-congregate shelter, essentially? And so the money that we are now funding shelter with is non-congregate. So that's like the tiny home village that is just across the street. That is like the new tiny home villages that are opening. There's an enhanced shelter in Queen Anne. For the second time this year, we have had new shelter resources come online. This should have happened 6 to 9 months ago. It should have been a down payment on shelter. Here we are. And then again, at the end of the day, when you don't have people moving out of shelter into permanent housing, it creates a backlog. Funding shelter at this point is important because we are 7 years into this state of emergency on homelessness, and we need to get people inside. When we fund shelter, it comes at the cost of funding housing, which is a permanent solution. And that's why that throughput is important. And that's why I say that this is the first year that we had $200 million in funding housing. We're the first time that we're meeting our benchmark. And that's why that is so important for the throughput out of shelter.
So there's sufficient, how close are we to having places for everyone to go out of shelter? I mean,
Not close.
That's what I thought. I mean, we're talking about need of hundreds of units, right, or thousands, and looking at tens.
And the Regional Homelessness Authority has a more realistic understanding of this than the city of Seattle did. And they need more money. And I'm going to be looking for that because we need high acuity, so high needs shelter. It is the most expensive and it is the most effective.
Are we doing better?
Are we doing better? We're doing better today than we were 6 months ago.
Seattle become a magnet.
Seattle is,
Talked about, we had almost,
yeah.
one that I thought were all out of state.
And so,
So folks on TV didn't hear Gordy say that, you know, folks right up the street are saying they're from out of state. You know, are we really a magnet for homelessness? Are people coming here because it's a more comfortable place if you can't afford to live where you live somewhere else?
yeah, good question. So it's not, again, this is occurring all across. What we are experiencing is a national trend. Everything we're going to talk about tonight is a national trend, and it's how we deal with it here in our city. The other, so then the West Coast has harder issues with homelessness than the East Coast. And then when you look at Seattle, we are, you could go all the way back to the origin story of America, where those who are troubled go west.
Whole West Coast. I know you gotta talk about.
Yeah. We're doing better today than we were 6 months ago. Yeah. What I can also say to that though is Seattle is the county seat for the whole county, and that's why the regional approach is so important.
Where's the money from?
Let me get back to you. Hold that one. I wanted to show you this picture, which is that Seattle is also the most isolated city of its size in the entire country. So the next closest city of comparable size is the Twin Cities or Chicago, Denver or Salt Lake City, or Sacramento, San Francisco. There's no other place in the country that is that isolated. I mean, Vancouver or Anchorage, that's on the other side of the border or a flight away.
Salt Lake City's had a lot of
Because they do,
money.
they are, so this is what I'm getting to, which is that you need to connect the number of shelter beds with the number of people living outside, right? And or create that throughput out of shelter into housing. And so is it a money problem or is it a how you do it problem? It used to be a how we did it problem with congregate shelter, not funding housing to the level that we need to. So you provide a type of shelter that people don't feel safe going into, and then you don't build the housing to get people out of the shelter that people will come into. So we are now funding shelter that people will accept, and we are now funding housing to get them out of shelter
So that's a big change right there.
in the last year and a half. Yeah. See, he's good.
Yeah, I got a question kind of along those lines.
Sure.
You mentioned that people are accepting housing that is non-congregate. I heard from the sweep today that happened in Ballard that there were reports of people that did not want to go to shelters and they weren't being offered housing. Yeah, is that like, so the, I mean, the sweep just happened today. Like, were people offered housing or are they just kind of totally off?
So, oh yeah. So the question was in Ballard comments today, were people offered housing or not? Essentially. And so let me take a step back to say that closing the park today is the first time that many in the public have become aware of the work that has been ongoing for the last 4 months. Right. And so in August, we created a census of everyone living in the park. In September, we created the needs assessment, figuring out what type of shelter those folks would accept. And then when the shelter capacity came online in October, it should have come online in March, we were set and ready to get people into that shelter. And so I need to go back and talk to the people on the ground to know exactly what happened today, but it is my understanding as we went into today, everyone would be taken care of and everyone would be followed up with, because an interesting problem about our situation is that when an encampment is removed or cleared, people come to it because they know that that's where the services are. And that's just, it is descriptive of the situation that we're in, where we don't have enough safe places for people to come inside. I can tell you that going into today, there were more tents than there were people in the park. Many of those tents were unoccupied because we have gone above and beyond to get everyone inside. The park closure that happened today was supposed to happen a month ago. But because the shelter capacity, because there were some, and it's totally okay when there's delays in getting shelter open, because it's better to do it right than not. But because of those delays, rather than closing the park a month ago and displacing the people that were living there into the neighborhood, we decided to wait until we were able to meet those people's needs. And so
Was there a sweep?
there was, so today, right, it looked better a week ago because the encampment removal has been going on for 4 months, and the planning started at least 4 months ago, and the encampment removal itself has been ongoing for the last 2.5 months. And that's why it looked better a week ago than it did. So with Ballard Commons Park, it is now closed as a park. It will be closed for 6 months to a year. And we will be doing remediation to the park and fixing the park because there has not been any parks maintenance to it in quite some time. As part of my budget, vibrant spaces, this was one that I missed, which is that I got the funding for the children's playground that was proposed in 2019. It went on pause because of the pandemic. And so we'll be building that children's playground. And we'll have an activation plan for people, all people, to be able to enjoy the park, right? It is currently fenced. Yep, and it will be fenced for 6 months to a year. I say a year, I don't know that it's going to be closed for a year, but I'd rather you hear now that it could be closed for a year. And if we can get it open sooner, we'll get it open sooner. But
Well, yeah, but of course, in April 2020, it was closed, it was cleaned and shut then too, right?
there was an encampment removal that did not focus on getting people inside. And the difference, again, we have changed how we do business. And it was really heartening to get to be part of the team with Reach and the Ballard Alliance, because we were able to meet people's needs in a way that they haven't been met in Ballard before. And so previously, when you did an encampment removal, you would post notice 24 to 72 hours ahead of the closure. And you would likely only have one type of shelter, and that was oftentimes congregate shelter. And you didn't know who was in the park, and you didn't know what they needed. And you would say, here's your one option, take it or leave it. You can't be here. And that is fundamentally different than what we've just done at Ballard Commons, which is that we spent the time figuring out what type of shelter people would take, and we would get them in there. Oftentimes, for some of them, they wanted to go with the group of friends that they would. For some of them, they needed to not be in the same shelter as some of the other people in the park, right? And so we had the time to be able to navigate some of these nuances. But to be able to do it at this scale, we had to create new shelter.
We've got a little microphone in place.
Oh, yep.
That was what happened.
So that, I mean, that is what we need. That is the method that we need to engage in. Again, the Regional Homelessness Authority is going to be the ones controlling this work.
They're affecting work.
Well, yeah, I mean, there obviously has to be a picking order, right?
They moved away from the quarter diagonal. I don't know. I think the city was involved, and the police department involved, fire department, safety.
Put a bunch of older septic stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the encampment on your street is well on my radar. There have been times that we've gotten more aggressively involved. There have been times.
Something changed, what, like, corner.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well.
Might have been fire.
And you know, I meet with the police chief every month, and I've talked to him about it. And you know, he's really brought up the fact that they're offering everyone. Yeah. Yeah, and so you know, the police chief reminded me that the crime prevention coordinator is finally, they're in background for the North Precinct, so we'll have a crime prevention coordinator. The police chief has also offered to the Safeway and anyone else personal safety courses, but the police are not the ones to address homelessness, right? That is a different section of professionals, and that's why I've said to the Regional Homelessness Authority, I need Ballard, I need Fremont, I need Green Lake to be second on your list. How much do you need? I'll get you that money. And I said that in my last town hall, which is also posted on my website if you want to see me say it.
Yeah.
It might be helpful for folks here who do or don't, well, who don't know, those who do know and do know, but to give them a little sense of what the RH, where the RHA has been, Mark Doan's now coming in, the downtown focus, just kind of the context a little bit.
Good, fair enough. Yes, so Regional Homelessness Authority was, it is its own governing authority. And so both Seattle and King County had to delegate legal authority, which is, I will tell you, its own process. So we got that done 2 years ago. The CEO of the regional authority was supposed to be hired in April of 2020. That did not happen because of the pandemic, and they were finally hired on in March of 2021. And in this year, they have staffed up their department, and they are poised to take all of the city and the county's contracts regarding homelessness on January 1st. And so we are a couple weeks away from them really having their feet under them. And you can read them in a recent Seattle Times article about the funding, about the homelessness funding at the city council and the Regional Homelessness Authority, is they will be able to do as much as they have the funding for. And that's why it's important for me when I say to Mark, please come to District 6. How much money do you need? Let me get it for you because we have a need.
That's probably a great moment for me to just mention and segue that Mark Doans will be our guest at the Ballard District Council tomorrow night, talking about all this, the Regional Homelessness Authority approach, the focus on downtown, some of the work that's happening in Ballard, and more broadly. So encourage folks to tune in on Ballard District Council YouTube channel for that tomorrow.
And I'll join in. I will swear I won't talk too much.
That's fine. I'll take the mic when I need to.
Yeah, fair enough.
You'll be fine.
What time?
That starts at 7, Gordy, from 7 to 8 tomorrow.
Yeah, so I mean, I can tell, I wanted to talk about growth here in the upzoned area. I want to talk about the new mayor. We started talking about regional homelessness authority.
I wanted to ask you some questions about some of your main budget things. Feel free to kind of go from there and answer people's questions here, but the mobile crisis team, is that what it's called? What's it called? The
Mobile crisis team.
mobile crisis team. Obviously, the huge focus, and I think you've done a really good job putting out the information about that as your focus and kind of conveying your priorities. So I appreciate that as constituent. What it went from 0 to 3.5 million in a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
So what is the programmatic emphasis of 3.5 million? Does it has a new staff? Who does the staff work for? Are they cops? Are they health counselors working in cops? Or are they working in housing office? Where are they? How does it kind of work? What's the emphasis of the programmatic push for 3.5 million, and how much staff and program you get for that?
Great question. And in all transparency, I made a request for $13 million this year for the mobile crisis team that would have expanded the team at $5 million and then had operating dollars to have a crisis solution center. So we already have the mobile crisis team. We already have one crisis solution center. We badly need a second crisis solution center. A crisis solution center, you divide the building down the middle. Half of it is for 72-hour intensive decompression from whatever behavioral or mental health episode that you're having. And then after that 72 hours, you go to the other side of the building where you have 2 weeks to be able to, again, decompress and get back on your feet. Without some place to go from there, people end up back on the street. And so that's, again, why we need to have a high acuity. So the way that this should work is we would have the mobile crisis team. We get somebody into the 72-hour section of the crisis solution center. They would move over to the 14-day section of the crisis solution center, and then we would move them into high acuity, high needs shelter. We have some of the funding for all of this, not enough. I'm still looking for more. What the mobile crisis team is they are a county program. So last budget cycle was the first $1 million that I put in to their team because I noticed that King County was cutting their funding. And I said, we need more of this, not less. So let's backfill and keep your team whole. This year we did the $2.5 million expansion so that we can have our own team here in the city of Seattle. I'll have to get back to you on how
So
many
we get
teams.
one place with a few staff.
You get, I think, you get 24/7 one team because it's not just the same people 24/7.
You can start to see right away how little 3.5 million really would do.
That's right, but this is moving us in the direction for the city to have designated crisis response rather than how it has been, which is the 2 teams that they have are countywide. And so this is Seattle getting its own mobile crisis team. The biggest barrier to the mobile crisis team being successful is that they have to have either the police or the fire department refer them to a site. And as I have tried to get them hardwired into 911, I have been told multiple times in 10 different ways that the police union will file an unfair labor practice for skimming their work. And so that's just kind of the truth and the transparency of the matter.
So you can't refer people without a cop going and doing an interview, is that?
Without SPOG agreeing to it. And so we're finding other ways to do it. You can always call the mobile crisis team directly, and I'll send you that number so that you can send it out to your group. Yeah.
Big corporations, yeah, an interest in how livable the city is, are giving money, big amounts of money to the city.
I would need, I'm not aware of that.
She says, we hear there's huge amounts of money coming from corporate giving like Amazon.
To the city of Seattle.
Take care of the money problem. And usually it's in connection with buying property.
I would need more information because the city can't, and this was part of Andrew Lewis's It Takes a Village campaign where he was getting private financiers to build tiny homes. And they had to set up a whole separate program because the city can't just take private funds like that. So I would need more information.
I think some of that might be going to organizations out there, so it's-
Right.
Yeah,
I work
there's
for a
definitely
community
nonprofits.
What I heard was hotels, they were buying hotels.
So they can fund any entity, you, the biggest company in the world, the richest person in the world, the poorest person in the world, can all donate to these nonprofits that provide these services, whether it's Mary's Place, Low Income Housing Institute, DESC. So you don't need the city to fund as a pass-through.
Couple thoughts coming from online that I
Sure.
want to share down. One is from Cindy, who says, hello, I'm a hospital-based psychiatric social worker. We need more mental health services. CSC is great, but it's short term. Many mental health centers are not accepting new clients. ER social workers also can refer to CSC.
Yes, that's absolutely. So that is the transition that I was saying. We need to have more high acuity, high needs beds.
That's what I heard you saying.
To transfer people out. And yes, we need more mental health. What I have noticed is that when I try to focus on everything at once, I can get nothing done. And if I focus intently on one thing, we usually see movement. And so this year, my movement.
Well, and
has been on
that
mental
seems
crisis
like a
care.
bit of a microcosm of a lot of what the problem has been. I mean, I don't need to editorialize too much, but it seems like a lot of what the problem has been is we declare a state of emergency. Everyone runs out, spends a little bit of money all over the place, and we don't get
Right.
a hell of a lot done.
Right.
Right. And so now it's refreshing and encouraging to hear that what I'm hearing is the things that are most concerning that seem to be the biggest obstacles, big mental health problems, big substance abuse problems leading to and contributing to a lot of the difficulties in getting stability in housing are getting addressed, if at least at kind of a more by person kind of at the case level kind of approach. It's just going to take a lot more of it, and it's going to obviously cost a lot of money.
And Andrea, I see your comment. Let me get you the actual numbers. I did not bring what the total staffing of what.
Yeah, and I asked you what the details were, but it's a counting program, and you can follow that up, and I can follow that up.
Andrew, don't take my off the cuff numbers as gospel here. So no, it's not $1 million per FTE.
Thankfully not.
But even though that's probably what they should be paid for the work that they do.
It's hard work. Another person, Lauren, wants to know, how are we going to deal with people who are living in vehicles? She says that they've had a woman on their block that's been there for 6 months, multiple outreach to different city agencies, trying to get her connected to services, having no luck. She hasn't spoken to anyone or accepted any services. Is there a vehicle outreach team, and how is that going to fit into this? And I would encourage you, Lauren, to tune in with the same question. We're going to push hard with Mark Dones tomorrow as well.
So the vehicle outreach team, which is really the only team in the city that does outreach work because people living in their cars is a completely different subset than people living in tents, because they still have a place that's inside. It is oftentimes their last piece of property, and it's the last thing that they know is theirs. And so you're dealing with a different subset of people, which is why the vehicle residency outreach team is so important. The mayor's transmitted budget completely cut all of their funding. My initial request was for $700,000, and that would have expanded the team and set up a Safe Lots pilot program. We've seen Safe Lots tried before and they failed because they weren't done right, much like congregate shelter. There's a way to do things, and then there's a way to not, right? And so we do need to have another Safe Lot pilot, and we need to do it differently. I'm very encouraged by the way that Mark Jones is talking about working with vehicle outreach. But if Lauren, if you feel comfortable sharing your phone number with Brent, or a way for me to get in touch with you, I would be happy to follow up with you, because in my office, we have a subset of our work that is essentially doing case management for homelessness. Is that what your council member's office, should your council member's office be a first response to homelessness office? Probably not, but that's the situation we're in. And so we have found success by focusing intently on two, sometimes 2.5 locations. And so when we focus intently on 2.5 locations, we're able to find success. When we focus more broadly, we're not. So Lauren would love to be able to, yes,
message her separately.
yeah.
So you're saying that, if I heard you right at the beginning of that answer, though, the vehicle outreach team or program was only citywide a few $100,000 of funding, which the current soon-to-be former mayor essentially proposed to zero out in her budget.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, it's such a huge damn problem.
Because people don't understand it. I think baseline. Also, the vehicle outreach team has in the past been, they are working for nothing. They were volunteer, they became a nonprofit. So now they're fiscal sponsors, the University Heights.
They don't see it and don't.
That's right. And so, look, I live here. This is my neighborhood. I see it. I'm not insulated from,
How big a group is that? What type
it's
of-
like 3 people. It's not very big. It's very small. They were operating with $100,000 for an annual budget, and most of that funding was going to things like trying to fix people's vehicles to get them moving again, getting them into shelter. By way of background, they only were provided 5 emergency housing vouchers, and they went fast because so what I can say is that Mark Jones has a better understanding of how you work with people living in their vehicles, where if you get them inside, you also need to give them a place to keep their vehicle for 6 months so they can have that transition inside and be okay letting that vehicle go, a place to fix your vehicles.
Yeah, and some of it is just not rocket science either. I mean, the first big kind of rodeo of RVs or whatever vehicle encampment basically didn't provide any water or sewer. And
They
literally,
had no water or
we were
sewer.
literally
Yeah.
community volunteers. We were literally taking down giant trunk loads full of 5-gallon waters so people could have water.
So that people could drink.
And that had to happen as a community effort because the city didn't figure out that people would need water.
Yes.
Right? So it's just a little bit of good staff work is going to go a long way to that problem.
And to that point, that's one reason that the Whittier Heights tiny home village here is so successful, because they're one of the few tiny home villages that actually has a building on site so that they can have indoor bathrooms. So that's right. And so that they can have their kitchen inside a building. Great neighbors. Right. I got to go over there and I brought them Larson's Kringla. Nobody could figure out how to say the Kringla part, but I didn't mind that. But it was nice to meet some of them.
Yeah, it's probably even 3 or 4 by now, Gordy. Yeah. But to have that kind of, you call that non-congregate housing, is that the generic term for that? So getting to having sufficient non-congregate housing is a long way from where we are now. I mean, it seems like we're going to have to succeed with some congregate shelter to really begin clearing out all the Ballard Commons, Woodland Parks, other places.
I mean, I would say no.
Okay.
Because
you think we can get there with non-congregate housing, or just a matter of being patient, or
because again, I don't think that people will accept congregate housing shelter.
Certainly a lot of them haven't.
Right.
To date.
And so it is the scale in which, so along Elliott Way, there's right before you get to the pedestrian bridge, it goes over Elliott kind of by, I think it's like a rec room is the sign that's on the building now. It used to be Carnival Cruises. Anyways, there's a King County wastewater facility.
The pump station.
Pump station. It's right next to the pump station. So it's the parking lot for the pump station. The county has put in modular housing. So it's like tiny home villages, but different. And this, again, when you create 4 walls and a door that someone can walk to the outside world, there's 100 different ways to do that. It's when you do the gymnasium where everyone's
right, the refugee camp.
That doesn't work.
Doesn't seem to.
And so there's a number of different ways to do non-congregate shelter. And again, we have to get the throughput because 2,500 units is what we have right now of non-congregate
housing
shelter.
shelter. Mhm.
It's just that it's full and
Sure
there's
is.
not a place to graduate people out of. So 2,500 units could be enough if we got the throughput going, but we're stuck because we don't have that.
Right, well,
And that's why I'm saying the regional, the ability, a lot of folks that come to Seattle that are homeless are coming from South King County, and then we rehouse them in South King County. If we were just able to keep them in South King County, then we would not be kind of doing this circle. Yeah. We had the Crown Hill Neighborhood Action Plan in committee this week. I don't know if anyone.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up too, so go for it. I hope people have heard about some of that and participated in some of the workshops that have happened. I certainly pushed out a couple of times onto listservs about the fact that comments were due by last Friday, if you're gonna make a public comment about it.
Yeah, so this was another thing that got stalled by the pandemic. It was supposed to happen in March 2020. And this is the Neighborhood Action Plan is the result of about a year and a half of community outreach with neighbors about what type of infrastructure you need, what should the design guidelines be for new buildings, sidewalks, pedestrian streets, all of the rest. Got put on pause. It didn't make it off the mayor's desk. Funny stories I'll share with you later about how I got it off the mayor's desk, but I will tell you I got it off the mayor's desk. We were able to pass it we were able to have it in committee. We will pass the resolution next Monday, the 13th. And then we have to create the design guidelines for the neighborhood so that there are guidelines that are representative of the community's ideas about how growth should happen and what it should look like.
So essentially, it's a sort of companion piece to the comp plan, right? And it creates, if you go back in and create code amendments, it creates zoning changes or amendments to design guidelines that say, okay, well, when you build here, you got to build like this, paying attention to these neighborhood goals.
Yeah, and it was really well done because it happened at the same time that mandatory housing affordability happened, where this area was upzoned.
Well, it was sort of part of our grand bargain here in Whittier Heights, right? We said to Mike O'Brien, look, if you're going to have a grand bargain, cut us into the bargain a little bit as the community,
right?
And do some specific neighborhood area planning that will help us absorb all this growth. We're going to take not just a lot of 10-story buildings over here on 15, but a lot of, townhouses and 2 or 3 houses, homes or lots per former lot here in the sort of residential small lot experiment.
That's right. And a funny story about.
Do you mute that, Hugh? Turn off your sound. Thank you.
Hang on.
Tell your funny story first.
Yeah, I'll tell my funny story, and then we'll get back. So I do district office hours every week.
I'll show her. I know how to shut up. I shut it up earlier. There's a little blue mute button top of your keyboard there.
Oh, you're good. So I do district office hours every week, and I had a resident in the neighborhood reach out to me about the people experiencing homelessness right by Petco and some issues that they were having right then and there. And so as part of my job, I then started reaching out to everyone that I knew that could help. Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so in this, I reached out to Fred up in the Crown Hill Village Association, who does all the gardening, because I was like, if anyone knows anything, it's Fred. And so I went up and I met with Karen, and we did a whole walk. And Karen was like, by the way, the action plan is stuck on the mayor's desk. Can you get it off? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, I can. We'll do this right now. And so it's just kind of interesting. Everything about the city right now is about homelessness. Even the community action plan got off the mayor's desk because I was out here trying to respond to homelessness. Right, and there, and at that point, there was a lot of rotting food, there was a lot of refuse. Yeah, and so I'm not a bully pulpit type of person. I'm not gonna stand up and beat my chest and say, hey, look, I did this, I solved the problem. I saw it, like, I even forgot that I fixed your street sign, but it's just this constant churn of doing the work that is important to me.
Community involvement.
Yeah,
So
I got a question about upzoning.
sure.
And I think it's a homeless question, but it's also a climate question.
Sure.
I moved into New York 6 years ago, so I wasn't involved in that, upzoning, so I'm not only super familiar with the process, but I have friends who live on the other side of the community, and they are in that now. They were, I guess, I lived in the Seattle area almost my whole life, so for 2 years, I was Sounders fan down in Portland. And they have lots of upzoning, they have lots of, I don't think they have single family housing, they kind of changed all the zoning so that you can build townhouses everywhere. And they obviously still have a homeless problem, but they've been able to add in density, and they've given people lots of options. More so than we've done there. I know they've done similar things in Minneapolis. Curious about is there any potential for kind of further upzoning kind of on a citywide basis to increase density?
Yeah, I
Can
mean,
you repeat question?
oh yeah, so can I summarize your question? You were talking about Minneapolis and Portland doing away with single family zoning, and will we upzone more parts of our city? What I'll add on to that is that the state of California is now doing away with single family. The entire state of the fourth largest GDP in the world is doing away with single families. They are in the
Just last
process.
month,
Yeah, just last
started
month.
the legislation on that.
Right, and it's so it gets back to what names of zones are one thing, and then what's allowed within the zone is another thing, right? So we right now have changed the name of single family zoning to neighborhood residential. That did not change what's allowed within that zone, but it did change the name of it.
Is that gonna be up for grabs?
So we are coming up to the major comp plan update, and that is when that conversation would happen. It happens every four years, the major comp plan update. There are minor comp plan updates that happen every year. Where I come from on this is that duplexes, triplexes, and quads are the most inexpensive way to build housing that is affordable. So I'm not saying affordable housing, the nonprofit builds it, that type of thing. But just from a sheer economic standpoint, it is cheaper to build a quad and house 4 families than it is to build an apartment building.
Neighbor's backyard, or just the cost analysis. I don't know what land that. But 800,000.
For a quad.
That doesn't include, that doesn't include.
The land would be about the same amount. So you're probably in for
Yeah.
1.5 on building those 4 units. So you figure you can put that on the market for somewhere. I mean, your cost would be on the order of like 300 to 400 grand per.
Yeah.
And then what it goes. So it's less expensive than a lot of the single family homes in the neighborhood.
It's limited to square footage. Just under 2,000.
Well, it is, you can only build what space allows, right, too.
And that's an RSL.
But I think it is in the RSL zone, yeah. Or maybe could even be in low rise.
Okay. So let me
But
put a
I
finer.
was just gonna make one observation before you kind of further expound on that, which is that, if you paid attention during this election, you did notice that essentially none of the candidates for your city council or the mayor's office were espousing support for single family residential zone.
We're doing away with it.
They were all advocating for doing away with it, but
Oh, yeah.
like everyone basically said, I think we've got to move past single family residential zoning in Seattle,
Well, and if I'm the first person to
including
tell
all
you,
the ones that we elected. So
yeah, I mean, look, if I'm the first person to tell you that zoning is based on race, then
It's 29 million.
I would say there's some homework that you need to do. So if I am the first person to say that zoning is based on race, and I'm the first person you've heard that from, sorry that I'm the messenger that you're hearing this from, but it is important to learn that history. And what I want to focus in on to answer your question directly is, even here in our single family zone or neighborhood residential zones here, there are duplexes and triplexes and apartment buildings that were built before the zoning got more constricted. If you look especially at West Woodland Elementary, there's an apartment building across the street that's in this neighborhood residential zone. That building can't be built today. When I look at our neighborhood here, the duplexes especially are the buildings that keep that neighborhood character, that look like every other house. There's 2 duplexes down the street from me, and it took me months to realize that they were the only reason that I finally realized that they were duplexes is because they have 2 addresses on them. And so if we want to keep the feeling of our neighborhood and build affordable housing and be able to have more people living in our community, that's the way we do it. With duplexes, triplexes, and quads.
Getting some different perspective, or
Sure.
at least questions from online, which is good. Cindy says, all the new development to increase density that I've seen seems very short-sighted. They're all 3 stories. Young couples have families, and as older residents age, these homes are not going to be safe or feasible. I think a lot of folks feel that way about the way it's being developed around here is not really going to lead to greater affordability or a more sustainable neighborhood outcome for the people who live here.
I am a fan of density, and I think townhomes are ugly.
It's not all of them.
They don't have to be, right? Like, look, here telling you where it is. The fact that and again,
Maybe they're just.
So is our problem with the design commission, the design standards? We just talked about seconds ago, we've got this new community action plan that's going to ostensibly change design guidelines right here out the window right there.
Right.
What can we do that'll make it better?
Part of it
How
is,
do we get involved to help
part of it is,
OPCD get it right for once?
I would argue it's not dense enough because they are practicing standards that require you to own the land underneath you. So if you were able to do a similar RSL zones in particular.
Very little.
Hang on.
Let him finish.
So with RSL zones, the intention, and again, I was not the policymaker at that time. RSL zones were set up so that people would build, and actually low-rise 3, which is the townhomes, more specifically, were set up so that you could build small apartment buildings where everyone would have a flat, like condoization. The state has very strict condo rules. Builders don't like to do it because they can get sued for the rest of their life. And more importantly, they have to put in an elevator, which oftentimes puts the project over from penciling for them to not. And so that's why I say it might be that they're not dense enough to actually be able to provide the right level of housing.
Right. I mean, there could
And
be
cost
ostensibly
benefit.
condos instead of townhouses if some of the legal requirements that allow for equity to work out.
Right.
Compared.
And so, these are all questions that are before us right now. If I had my magic wand, I would say that, we would do it so that you would have one level, you had the same amount of square footage, and you would live on one level. I hate the stairs. I don't know. I like the density in the sense that it has made Ballard a more vibrant place. I had some really tough love there for a while, watching the neighborhood I grew up in get torn down. And when I lived on 63rd and 20th, I lived in 4 years of construction.
Yeah, you did.
And I think they're ugly, but we need it. I can't hold these 2 opinions and not merge them.
Speaking of infrastructure and guidelines,
Yeah.
I may have please suggest
Yes, ma'am.
that we develop the concept of green infrastructure.
Yeah.
Preserving green infrastructure, it's free, all we have to do is save it. It contributes tremendously to the context of
Permeable soil, trees.
Part of the design guideline.
Yeah. I mean, and so again, something that I've been battling to get on my desk is the tree ordinance.
Yeah,
It'll be in committee tomorrow again.
that's gotta be enforced, and the current one is enforced.
No, yeah, that's a question online too. What's going on with the 2020 director school regarding exceptional trees?
So I have been demanding that they start SEPA on the tree ordinance, and pass and put a bill out there, a bill for us to pass. I told them that I
So is
needed
there
it by
legislation
September.
even there now, or is it?
We'll find out by the end of the year. I've been promised 100 ways to Sunday that they would have it to me by the end of the year. They've missed
Most
every.
people don't understand what exceptional trees are.
Right.
I do.
Yes, hang on, Gordy. So what we need from the mayor's office and from STCI is the draft of the ordinance. Without that, we can't enforce anything. We can't change exceptional trees. Their draft rule in 2020 provided more protections for exceptional trees, but it was never put into action. In part,
We never made a code, you mean?
we've never updated the code around it. And so that's what the tree ordinance is. I have been promised that they will start SEPA by the end of the year. The difference being if they just do parameters and buckets of information and ideas rather than an actual ordinance. Those are going to be two different things that I'm dealing with. But I will tell you, it has been hard to get things off the desk.
Well, it's gonna be really hard to deal with, and when you get to figuring out what an exceptional tree is and codifying it, and the amount of growth we have right around here, it's gonna very soon be trees versus houses too.
Yeah, and I mean, there's other ways to. I mean, there's the 2 lots that's right up. Is it? It's right by the Thirsty Fish. Sorry, it's blocked down.
There's that whole road.
Yeah,
but
it's out of
that's
home.
still Mary, isn't it? I think.
I think it's Mary. Yeah, the reason I know it, the street goes right into the Chevron, whatever that is.
Right.
So there are 2 units back there and a whole bunch of trees that got torn down. And there are some trees that probably could have been preserved because they're just going to build a parking lot. But then a lot of those trees did need to come down for that new housing.
May not be exceptional trees.
Might not have been exceptional trees. And so,
This can say exceptional trees, I mean, a group of trees is just valuable.
and so again, we have to balance, right. And we also, and what's important about the tree ordinance is that it would create an in lieu fee so that if you cut down a tree that could not be saved to build what you need to build, that money would plant and maintain more trees throughout the city.
That's not offensive. It takes decades for a tree to get to be valuable as the one that's cut down. And then
Yes.
that's if it survives in climate change. I mean, it's just not a good solution.
Well, also the least forested parts of our city also is where people who have been most historically marginalized live. And so we do need to be reforesting parts of our city.
That's fine, but we should be saving the infrastructure we have as much as possible.
I don't just, I'm actually in agreement with you. I am fighting for that as much as possible. And we also have to look at, but I have to share with you that we can't put density versus trees.
I mean, you
We have to do
necessarily
it
have to say, okay, if we're not gonna adopt density here, then what do? Well, we become less dense and we expand outward. And, I think just as many folks are gonna say, you don't wanna be the pariah that is Phoenix or Atlanta or somewhere else where growth management hasn't tried to contain, and then you just go out into the forest. It is a trade-off.
One that, hold on, can I make this one point and then I'll let questions again, which is specifically on 80th and 28th, there was an old City Light property that got turned into Habitat for Humanity housing. So when you ask where those $200 million go, this is one project that would fund. And this is actually, we're creating home ownership opportunities. So these are, no, it was just it was a City Light property. If you go up.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah.
That one.
So it got turned into townhomes that people will buy. And we were originally going to have 8. And it would have cost cutting down a number of trees. And instead we built 7 and saved the trees. So
Maybe it would help explain what's that. I don't know.
yeah, so diameter breast height, which is about 4 feet off the ground, is 4.5. Sorry, it's been a couple years since I ran my saw. What are the parameters? It depends on the species.
4.5 and
Yeah.
21.
Okay, thank you, Gordy.
There's a grade below that, it's like, say, two. And everybody-
Significant trees.
Is any, yeah.
Yeah.
Does everybody realize that we're talking about cleaning our air and it will become more dense and become more important that we want the trees to produce oxygen and bring in our carbon?
Well,
That's what they do.
So I think that they might realize it, but when their only motivation is the bottom line of the project penciling, that's why you have to have regulation, right?
They have to be enforced.
Right, the developers aren't really that focused on that.
Some of them are, but not all.
Some of them are, but not so much, because it's just hugely impacts their bottom line. And then young people who really care about this stuff also really want to find a way to get a foothold into this community and live somewhere where they can, just not survive rent, but build some equity like so many of us have.
Developers, if they want.
And I do want to also highlight that you can build townhomes that aren't ugly, and you can build townhomes that save trees, and build townhomes that don't knock down historic buildings. And I use 59th and 60th and 20th as the example, because half a block east on 60th, there's a town, or the townhomes that were sided with barn lumber, and they look amazing. They look fantastic. On 20th, one of the townhome developments preserved the big tree out in front, and it adds value to that development. Just a block south from there, they saved the Crawford House on the corner of 60th, 59th, and 20th, and they built the townhomes around it, and it preserved the character of the neighborhood. There's a way to do it, but
How do we do that?
Yeah, and it's density drives, that's the thing that is me. Density becomes, in fact, I've heard developers call it density improvement. And if that drives, then the trees are moved out.
right, if you don't give them regulatory protections. But and I also, again, we need to be able to provide builders other exceptions out of the code to save trees, because oftentimes if we are mandating that they have a certain height, bulk, scale, setbacks, only a certain floor area ratio, and they have to make their project pencil while not using a segment of their private property, we're not going to get them there. And so we do have to provide them additional exceptions. It's a balance, because when you look at San Francisco, they're in a worse spot than we are because they didn't change any of their zoning, and no one can afford to live there.
It's not the first time this has happened, but the number of men involved.
Right. Well, it was a golf course, but yeah. Yeah.
The significant trees are just starting to come back in a lot of Ballard, right? I mean, we certainly have
I agree.
a history of having a lot of deforestation.
Even after the Retree Ballard campaign, what was that, 96?
Yeah, it takes a while to grow a big tree, you
Yeah.
know? There's a great comment online here too from Cindy who just flagged that in the last couple of months, National Geographic did a piece on trees in Los Angeles and Los Angeles County, and really looked at the contrast between affluent and impoverished neighborhoods and how big a difference that made for heat sink and effect, as well as like pollution and air quality and all kinds of stuff for public health. It's definitely true that more affluent neighborhoods have better forests.
Well,
Part of the-
yeah.
the big green infrastructure is something to say.
And when you look, so we have part of the accountability with SDCI is I make them report to my committee every quarter about why haven't we gotten the darn tree ordinance yet. But along the way, we get a lot of really great information. So if you want to go back and watch any of their presentations, they're all on the Seattle channel, award-winning Seattle channel. One of the presentations that struck me was they put up a map of where our city is forested and compared to economic value of that neighborhood. And the most affluent neighborhoods have the most amount of trees, right? So
The tree canopy measure has some faults too. The measure spread but not height.
Mhm.
And a lot of the old evergreens are more valuable when it comes to purifying the air than these big spread deciduous plants that lose their leaves. And issues like that that should be sorted out too.
And something and I can't stress enough that we need to be planting more trees, right? Like we have,
But remember, they take a lot of water.
and that has been, Cindy, who lives in Green Lake, brought this to my attention, where this is going to be part of, when I'm looking at the tree ordinance, this is something that it's not just that you have to plant it, but that you are required to maintain it. Because right now what's happening is the builder will build the building, plant the tree out front, and then never tell the owner they have to do anything about it.
Right.
And then we have a drought, which we're gonna have more of.
Yep.
And it takes decades for that tree to do its job, do the job that you hope it eventually will do.
But again, that
Have a lot of considerations there. Just planting a tree is not a solution.
right, but again, that additional canopy does reduce the amount of heat, especially on concrete and impervious surfaces. And so I'll take it a step further to say the largest property owner with the least amount of trees is the city of Seattle on our streets. Like I kid you not, because that's where the concrete, I mean, that's where the concrete roads, I mean,
Because of older standards.
I think I've checked off most of my.
Yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job touching on stuff. I wanted to ask you just real quick with the last few minutes we have. Well, I first want to throw it to anyone else. I don't want to hog the floor. I want to ask you a couple things about public safety you were talking about though. I think it was really important what you said about at the very beginning, you were talking about budget, about preserving funding for the cops and kind of funding it at the level as best you could. But clearly it's still super demoralized force we have, and a big problem with SPOG sort of not wanting to play very nice politics with either the executive side or the city council.
Yeah, it's quite this. I mean, if I'm the first person that's telling you this information, I need you to do a little bit of homework. But if you look at the SPOG president as compared to the last SPOG president, there is a difference of night and day. And the morale is quite low, and there's also a very troubling culture amongst many people in the department. And to have people coming in from outside the city with a very different view of how the world should be, carrying a badge and a gun and policing us,
It's counter to what we were trying to get to here, for sure. I would say that.
yeah.
And I would also, I guess, reaffirm your notion that assuming we'll have a better than average kind of year, or maybe much better than average kind of year in terms of departures from the force, even without any rifts, is a completely Pollyannish way to approach it, right? There's going to be people leaving probably en masse, just like there were this year. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts? What's the council been talking about? How can we try and shore up and turn morale around? Is the plan to just really leave that in Mayor Harrell's camp? Where are we with trying to turn the force around?
And so part of it is, I have monthly meetings with Chief Diaz, and one of the things that is really that I appreciate about him is that he's really looked at the model of we have to have guardians and not warriors. And I would say that we're not there yet with the Seattle Police Department. We're still in warrior mode. And part of that is just basic training. When you go to the Washington State, one training group that provides the training for you to be a certified peace officer is the technical term. It's done statewide by one entity. And something that Chief Diaz has said is that we need to have people come to the Seattle Police Department and get training before they go to the state training facility, because we need them to, before they get any more information, to know how we do business here in the city of Seattle. The majority of the departures have not been officers hired in the last 4 to 5 years. The other thing is that the largest departures from the Seattle Police Department happened 3 times in the last decade, and they're all related around accountability or further oversight. And so the first large spike was with the consent decree being put in place. The second large spike was when the accountability ordinance was put in place, and the third spike was in 2020. And so we have to also look at the root reasons at why we're having departures. And what kind of people do we want policing our city? And I can tell you that the people that we've hired in the last few years and that we are looking to hire are those types of people.
That's a good answer. I appreciate that. I think it's not going to get any easier until we get some traction on some of the homeless stuff, because we just have so much of cops in terms of mental health crisis management.
Yeah.
But it certainly was clear in your budget stuff that there's a recognition of that at least. So it's a start.
Yep. We have the programs, we just have to have them at the scale that we need them.
It's going to take a little time.
Yeah. But I mean, when we look at what's going on with Ballard Commons right now, we have changed the way that we do business. And I think what I've sat with today in the last couple of days, and there's going to be more announcements next week and coming weeks about more changes coming to that area, because you can't just do one thing and expect everything to change. And to change the direction of bureaucracy is not an overnight experience. It takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of staying power to say we're continuing to go this new direction. And I feel like we're starting to come around that corner.
Good. Well, we're here to hold you accountable.
Good.
I appreciate your taking the time to talk about it in detail.
Yeah,
To be here with it. Not very many of us. It really is valuable to the community that is attending.
Yeah. And if it was Lauren, I think that I need to circle back with.
Yeah, I can message her separately and figure that out. It was Lauren who was on Grant.
Yeah.
Lauren C.
Okay.
Lauren C. If you just I'll just put my email in the chat here. You can just email here.
You have to change this to everything.
You're right, yeah.
She looks like she might be gone already.
The word will spread, I'm sure.
I mean, I'm still here. Other questions? It's really nice to meet you, Marty. I think we've met before, though. Yeah. Good. I do. Yeah, I live not too far away. Yeah, it was fine. It was exciting to find my old Ballard house. I got to. Yeah, well, I bought a house. And sharing too much. Yeah, we're still recording on this one. Yeah.
No one's gonna hold that too much. You don't have to say your address on TV.
But built in 1937, single owner. So Howard and Twyla lived there from 1937
Wow.
until 2020.
Wow.
It is. That's exactly right. Twyla lived in a house when she heard the report on the radio that Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
Hasn't been updated since probably 1976. No. During the Great Depression, when they were doing all.
The day that house went on the
Huh.
Like, or you can tell us where it is.
Pretty cool.
I'll speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you
Sure.
and sign off here. I want to do exactly that. We're just kind of rambling here. We're adding much for folks online at this moment. So Cindy's still weighing in. One last question though. What you say? You mentioned goal to get directorial paperwork signed before the end of the year, just a few weeks away. Will you let us know when this is achieved? Yes.
Yes, and you can watch my city council committee tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. on the Seattle channel for their most recent report. They were supposed to brief me this afternoon, but it's been a wild week of council president, council rules, finishing up the business of the year, and all the rest.
Only Tuesday. It's already been a full week.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Brent.
Appreciate it very
Yeah.
much. Appreciate everyone being here. Appreciate you folks who joined us online. Please let me know how it worked. I'm not sure here watching. It looks like it's working fine. My connection's dropped out a few times, but Councilmember Strauss has been able to continue fine. We're just trying the basic Zoom and utilizing YouTube where it will work. So I'm going to end the meeting now on TV, but we'll hope to do this again with you before too long. Have a safe and lovely holiday.